English with Gabby. Today I'm teaching you all about the future tenses in English. I have some good news for you about the future tenses in English. Did you know that the future is the easiest time to talk about? The main reason for that is because there's usually 6 to 8 different ways that you can talk about the future, and most of them are without even using the future tenses. Did you know that you can also use present tenses as well when you're talking about future scheduled events? You can also use modals and words like hope and wish to talk about the future. Let me give you some examples of how we can talk about the future in a few different ways. First, future simple with going to. I'm gonna hang out with my friends tomorrow after class. Future simple with will. Sure, I'll help you. Future progressive. I'll be studying tomorrow night because my TOEFL test is next week. My train is leaving tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Present simple. My parents arrive next week from Texas. Future perfect. He will have already cooked all the food by the time the guests arrive. Future perfect progressive. He will have been studying English in Chicago for 6 months by the time he returns to his country. Modals. I would like to move to Arizona someday in the future. Now, let's dive deeper into specifically how to use the 4 future tenses. First, let's talk about future simple with will and going to. The first thing I want you to know about future simple is that I've noticed throughout the years that students feel more comfortable using will instead of going to, but native speakers actually use going to more. Let me explain. If you say, she will travel to Spain next year, this is not so common for native speakers to say. We would say, she's going to Spain next year, or she's gonna go to Spain next year, because this is talking about future plans. So let's talk about the differences between using will and going to. Technically, both forms are always correct, but we use them for different purposes. When we're talking about future plans, we typically use going to. Like I said, she's gonna go to Spain next year. For last minute quick decisions, we typically use will. Sure, I'll help you. I promise I'll do it. For predictions, we can actually use both, depending on what kind of prediction we're making. For predictions that have evidence, we use going to. For example, telling the weather. It's gonna be really cold this weekend. We would use going to. If you're not so sure, but you're just basing your prediction on your opinion, we would say, I'm sure she'll like this restaurant. It's really good. When you use will and going to, you always have to use them with the base form of the verb. So we have subject plus will or going to plus base form of the verb. Because remember, with modals, we always use the base form afterwards. Then after that, we have the object and then time. For example, she is going to travel to Spain next year. Future progressive. This tense is used to talk about things that will be in progress at a specific time in the future. It's like if someone asks you, what are you doing at a specific future time? For example, this weekend, I'll be studying. We often use future progressive with other verb forms. I can't hang out tomorrow because I'll be studying for my test. So notice I use can't hang out tomorrow, present tense, with future progressive tense. The form for future progressive tense is will plus be plus verb with ing. Will be ing. Or be going to plus ing. I'm gonna be studying this weekend, so I can't hang out with you. Now let's talk about the 2 most challenging future tenses. Future perfect and future perfect progressive. Anytime I teach perfect and perfect progressive tenses, students always ask, Gabby, do I really have to know these verb tenses? The answer is yes. Now, you don't have to use them if you don't want to, but if you're trying to get to a higher level of English, you should definitely try using these verb tenses. Also, Americans do use them, so it's good to know these tenses so that you can recognize them and understand them when you hear them used. First, let's talk about future perfect. Future perfect is used to talk about a future activity or action that will be completed before another future activity or action or time. So typically we can have future perfect describing 2 future events and showing which one happens first, Or we can talk about a future event and a time. For example, by the time Kumiko returns to Japan, she will have studied English for 1 year in the USA. This is showing two future events, one happening before the other. Here's an example of a future event and a time. By October 10th, Veronica will have studied English for 6 months. This is giving a date and a future event. So let's take a look at the form. Subject plus will plus have plus past participle, or V3, the third form of the verb. Then we have the object and time. By 12 o'clock, the students will have studied for 3 hours. Or a negative example, she won't have studied for that long by the time she goes back to her country. Now let's talk about future perfect progressive or continuous tense. Oftentimes, native speakers use these almost the same way, with one slight difference that we're going to talk about now. Future perfect progressive is used to talk about a future activity that will be in progress at another future time or during another future event. When we use future perfect, we're concerned with the action being completed in the future. When we use future perfect progressive, we're more focused on how long something will be happening in the future. For example, by the time she arrives at the restaurant, we will have been eating for 30 minutes. Here I want to emphasize the 30 minutes, the duration of the future event. If I said, by the time you arrive at the restaurant, we will have eaten already, this is a more likely future perfect sentence because I'm just focused on the fact that the eating will have been completed. By the time Mohammed arrives in Saudi Arabia, he will have been living in New York City for 10 months. By the time he lands in Jeddah, he will have been flying for 16 hours. Here I'm emphasizing the whole duration of the flight. The runners will have been running for 4 hours by the time the marathon is finished. Here are a few important reminders or tips about future perfect progressive. You can't use all verbs in future perfect progressive form because remember, not all verbs can go in ing form because not all verbs can be continuous or progressive. So we mainly use action verbs. For example, you can't say will have been knowing or will have been being because these verbs cannot be progressive. Instead, you would have to say will have known, will have been. So in these cases, use future perfect, which is almost always correct to use. So, do you feel like a professional now with the future tenses? Don't forget to check out my previous lessons on past tenses and present tenses. Well, that's it for today. Go ahead and leave me a comment with a sentence in a future tense so that I can check your mistakes. That's it for today. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.